Anyways, all right, back to our story over here. Let's have a discussion today about challenges. I'm going to assume that the fact that there's less people today on the class than usual is not because of any busyness that may be going on, but because most people don't have challenges in life, and therefore it's not a relevant topic to most, but just a very select few would be my guess. So so today's topic will through the parsha, through the Torah portion, we will get into discussing challenges. And I'm very excited about this. It's an interesting discussion, and it's based on our Torah portion. But first, as always, we need to start with a joke. So the great joke goes like this. You'll see how it's connected to the class, but what do you call an Egyptian doctor? What do you call an Egyptian doctor? A chiropractor. That's joke number one. Joke number two, it only gets better from here. What did King Tut's secretary say on the phone? Sorry, he can't help you. He's all wrapped up now. Okay. All right. Great, good jokes. And that's because we are going to get into the discussion of Egypt, into Mitzrayim, into Egypt. And by the way, I Googled like Egypt jokes. Those are like the best ones. There were a lot. I was like weeding out some decent ones. Okay. All the rest were like, where's my mummy or something, all those types of jokes. But anyways, we're going to talk about Egypt. So let's give you the backstory. We kind of flip from Genesis, and Genesis is really cool. We have the creation, the story of Noah, then Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and the story of the patriarchs, matriarchs, and their kids. Wonderful time they had, really great, cool stuff. And then it disintegrates really fast. In the beginning of Exodus, the Jewish people are there in Egypt, and pretty quickly they get into exile. And of course, the Pharaoh makes a decree, and that decree is that all Jewish boys should be thrown into the Nile, wherever be killed. Eventually, he actually expands the rule to all people in his kingdom. And of course, we know the story, how Moses was thrown into the river by his parents, but not thrown into a river, but put in a basket. The Pharaoh's daughter, Batya, saves this little baby, and this little baby grows up to be Moses. Moses, at some point, obviously recognizing his roots, one day sees an Egyptian taskmaster beating a Jew, and he kills the taskmaster. He kills the Egyptian taskmaster. When Pharaoh finds out about it, how did he find out? Of course, from a fellow Jew, of course, because we're always our worst enemy. And so when the Pharaoh finds out about it, he tries to kill Moshe. And Moshe has to run away for his life, and he runs away from Egypt, and he heads off to the land of Midian. And where does he end up by? Like many of our patriarchs and matriarchs, like Eliezer, the son of Abraham, like Jacob, he ends up by a well. Many of the shidduchim, many of the marriages in the Torah happened by a well. And of course, he ends up by a well, and he's standing there by the well, and there's a man in Midian called Jethro or Yisro. And this guy Jethro has many daughters, no sons, and he was sending his flock with his daughters. Why with his daughters? It says he had renounced belief in idolatry. Therefore, nobody in town was friends with him anymore. He couldn't hire anybody, and so the only people to work on his flock were his daughters. So he sent his daughters to the well, and obviously the daughters not being well liked, they were chased away from the well, and Moses saved them. And that's where we're going to pick up today's discussion, and that's where we're going to segue into our discussion, which will ultimately lead us to the lessons that we can learn from Moshe in our lives and the challenges in our life. So let's take a look, now that I've given you the background, setting the stage where we are. We're at the point in Moshe's life when he had left Egypt because he had killed an Egyptian. He was now at the well, and he was standing there, and there were these daughters of Jethro were standing there by the well. And so we're going to hop in here, and it's in Exodus 2:15, chapter 2, verse 15. And it says like this. Second. One more moment. Okay. And it says like this. Moses fled from Pharaoh and ended up in the land of Midian. Moses was sitting near the well, The sheik of Midian had 7 daughters who came to draw water. As they were beginning to fill the troughs and water their father's sheep, other shepherds came and tried to chase them away. Moses got up and came to their aid and then watered their sheep. So Moshe's a nice guy. He sees people being attacked. He stands up for them. And not only does he stand up for them, he feeds the daughters of Midian. He feeds their flock and their sheep the water. So not only does he save them, but he actually helps them afterwards. But they came home without their hero. So when they came to their patriarch Reuel, or Jethro, he asked them, "How did you get to come home so early today?" By the way, Jethro had 7 different names, and it wasn't because he went bankrupt 6 times. Anyways, an Egyptian man rescued us from some shepherds. They replied, "He also drew water for us and watered our sheep." "And where is he now?" he asked his daughters. "Why did you abandon the stranger? Call him and let him have something to eat." Moses decided to live with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Tzipporah as a wife. So that's the story. That's how he met his wife. So he saved these daughters of Jethro. They came home. Jethro said, "How did you get home so early?" "Oh, somebody saved you." "Why did somebody save you?" "Invite him home." So he came home, and eventually he married one of their children. Now, in the Torah, every single word is important. We have to appreciate that. As much as the Torah says, it also doesn't say. For example, Abraham, we don't have any stories of Abraham in the Torah, and I've discussed this in a previous class, until he's pretty much 75. Moses, we have a lot of his history from the time he turns 80, which is when he goes to save the Jewish people. But until then, we have precious little about him. Many of the characters in the Torah, certain details of their life are blown up. Certain details are written very concise. Within the mitzvahs of the Torah, within the laws of the Torah, some laws are written at length, some are written concise. Every single word of the Torah is important. If a word is written, that's because there is a lesson here. And so today we're going to focus on an interesting word, which would never jump at you, but we're going to focus on the word "and an Egyptian man." The question is, why does the Torah use the description "an Egyptian man"? Now, the simple answer would be, well, that's probably how the daughters of Jethro described him. They didn't know who he was. He, I guess, looked Egyptian. So they said, or he told them he was from Egypt. So they came home. They said, "Who saved you?" They didn't know his name. So they said, "An Egyptian man rescued us from the shepherds." That's all good and fine. That's a good answer. That's why Torah writes "an Egyptian man." But the question is, why does the Torah need to include that detail? In fact, it's very possible that the daughters gave more details. Maybe they said, "A very tall, skinny Egyptian man saved us." It's very possible they said that too. I doubt they gave only one word of description, right? So the question is, why does the Torah choose to include the description that the daughters use "an Egyptian man"? Why does it not just be concise and say, "A Egyptian rescued us from some shepherds"? Sorry. "A man rescued us from some shepherds." That would have been the concise version. That would have been what makes the most sense. Why does the Torah have to use the word Egyptian? What in the word Egyptian, what does it add to our story, right? Again, so any detail written in the Torah is because it adds to the narrative that the Torah is trying to teach us. The Torah is not just a history book. That's something we have to appreciate. It's not just history. It's history that is relevant to us. I was just studying the other day about the books of the prophets. We don't realize there were many other prophets that the Jewish people had. The only prophecies that are written are the prophecies that are pertinent to us. But there were many more prophecies given to the Jewish people. Only things that are pertinent to us today are written. And so if the Torah is trying to tell us the story of Moses, why does it have to add that he was an Egyptian man? Why is that detail necessary? Why doesn't it just go with the word "man"? You follow? Again, the daughters probably use that description, but that's not a reason for the Torah to write it. So here's a very interesting thing. So the Zohar actually tells us that the word Egyptian is very important. It is actually integral to the story that the Torah is trying to convey. So let's take a look. The Zohar explains, there in Egypt he was born, there he was raised, and there he achieved his true greatness. In other words, the fact that Torah mentions the Egyptian was an important point. They were not just trying to describe where he was from, but it's also a description of how he became the person he became. And so again, the Zohar says in the word of Egyptian, there in Egypt he was born, there he was raised, and there he achieves his true greatness. The Zohar repeats itself, saying there 3 times for further emphasis. It was essential that all 3 elements take place in Egypt. In other words, in our lives, right? We have these 3 stages in our life. There's the place that we're born. There's the place that we're, so to speak, raised. And there's the place where we achieve greatness. They can many times be 3 different stages of our life. And it's telling us that Moses, before he came to Midian, all 3 of these stages in his life happened in Egypt. In other words, when the Torah wants to teach us about the greatness of Moses' character, it emphasizes that his birth, upbringing, and greatness were all associated specifically with Egypt. So it's a very, very interesting Zohar. And it's interesting also because it's important for us, I believe, to study Moses. Again, Moses, there's not a lot of details given about him before he bursts onto the scene and saves the Jewish people, right? We have very few details. We have about his birth. We have details about his birth surrounding him. We have the detail of him fighting the Egyptian. Then we have him in Midian, and shortly thereafter, he meets God and sends him on the mission. So the fact that Torah is using the word Egyptian, it's a lesson for us in our understanding of how Moses became who he became. And it's important for us to understand that. Why? Because Moses is the one who redeems the Jewish people from Egypt. We want to understand, how did Moshe get to that level of leadership to where he was chosen to redeem the Jewish people from Egypt? And through understanding that, we can understand how to be redeemers of ourselves. What do I mean? Egypt, the reason why we still study about Egypt, and the reason the Torah talks about Egypt constantly, and the reason in our prayers we mention Egypt all the time, is because the message of leaving Egypt is a daily message in our life. The sages tell us, B'chol dor vador, in every single generation, Chayav Adam, a person needs to see, Chayav Adam lirot et atzmo, a person needs to see himself, Ki'ilu hu yatsa hayom mitzrayim, as if today he left Egypt. The Talmud tells us every single day we need to look as if we left Egypt. Now, from a technical perspective, what's the meaning behind that is, technically, if the Jews hadn't left Egypt back then, we'd still be in Egypt. That's a very technical perspective. But a deeper perspective of that is there's an Egypt in our lives. What is Egypt? In Hebrew is Mitzrayim, and Mitzrayim in Hebrew also means Meitzarim. Meitzarim means boundaries, limitations. And so just as we left the limitations and boundaries of Egypt back then, we have to be able to leave the limitations and boundaries in our life. Every single day, we have to take the lesson of leaving Egypt in our life. What we did yesterday may be a limitation for today. And what we may do tomorrow may be a limitation towards next week. We always have to be striving to go beyond our limitations and boundaries, the thing that constrain us. And we all know that we have things that constrain us and hold us back. Usually they are internal, sometimes they are external. And so if we want to be able to overcome our own limitations, our own boundaries, the own things that are holding us back from redeeming ourselves, we want to be that redeemer, we need to study a little bit about Moshe. And when we can understand Moshe, then we can understand about ourselves and how to overcome our own limitations and boundaries. In fact, it says elsewhere in the Talmud that we each have a little bit of Moses inside of us. And so it's definitely apropos that we study about Moses and understand, what is this message? The Zohar seems to make a big deal out of it. What is this message of Moses being called the Egyptian, to the point that we say he was born there, he was raised there, and he achieved greatness there? What is the lesson of that to us? How do we understand it, and what does it mean to us? So let's delve into this. Let's first start with the birth. We say that Moses was born. We're going to start with philosophically birth. We're going to put this question aside. So we're going to remember this question. We're going to get back to understanding what it means that Moses was born, raised, and achieved greatness in Egypt. We're going to get to understand that. But first, we're going to take a philosophical view at birth in general. What do people usually do when a child is born? They celebrate, right? And what do you do on your birthday? You celebrate.
Mm.
From a Jewish philosophical point of view, you may be surprised to find out that birth seemingly should not be a very happy occasion. In fact, to the point where the Talmud has a discussion, some places it has a debate. Is it better to be born or is it better not to be born? And the consensus is it's better not to be born. When you think about it, it's an interesting observation. Life has its ups, it has its downs, it has its fun, and it has its tough parts. And the question is it worth being born? Then the answer is, of course, it's not worth being born. But if you are born, make a good life out of it. But anyways, let's get from a spiritual perspective. This is the Talmud. The Talmud says like this: why is birth not the greatest day of your life? At least that's what we would think. So the Talmud says, Rabbi Simlai taught, to what is a fetus in its mother's womb comparable? To a folded notebook. Its head rests between its knees, and its mouth is closed, and its umbilicus is open. And it eats from what its mother eats, and it drinks from what its mother drinks. So in other words, what I'm saying is, you're doing nothing, and you're getting everything. Sounds good so far. A lot of people would like to live that way today, right? A candle is lit for it above its head, and it gazes from one end of the world to the other. This is more spiritual. So we said the physical part, you do nothing, and you get everything. Now, more spiritually, you have a light that allows you to see from one end of the earth to the other. So in other words, you have, let's say, divine inspiration. You can see everything, understand everything. Everything is open to you. And there are no days when a person is in a more blissful state than those days when he is a fetus in his mother's womb. And we'll add on to it. And a fetus is taught the entire Torah while in the mother's womb. So you're in your mother's womb, and an angel comes to you and teaches you the entire Torah, something that most of us will never finish in our lifetime. And once the fetus emerges into the airspace of the world, an angel comes and slaps it on its mouth, which is, they say that's what this is from, under our nose. That indent comes from the angel slapping us over there, causing it to forget the entire Torah. As it is stated, sin crouches at the entrance, and as the explanation of that means, when a person enters the world, he is immediately liable to sin due to his loss of Torah knowledge. So birth doesn't sound so great anymore. You're losing all these great benefits. It's like suddenly you got a promotion, you lose all your benefits. You lost your free room and board, you lost your divine inspiration, now you lost your Torah, your Torah knowledge. And in fact, that we're told, therefore, when a child is born, that's why a child cries. It's not so happy. Obviously we know the physical reason why they cry. They're learning how to breathe. But from a spiritual perspective, the reason the child cries, it's a very unhappy moment. Suddenly lost all of its greats, suddenly lost all of its wondrous abilities and easy life, and suddenly it's has to figure how to eat and to poop, and on top of that, more spiritually, it loses its great vision and Torah knowledge. So why do we celebrate a birthday? Why would we celebrate a birthday? Any thoughts? From a spiritual perspective, why would you celebrate a birthday?
Well, I think.
Yeah. This is Zoom. It's hard to.
Yeah, I think because yes, you lose that spiritualness, but when you come into this world, this is the only place that you can do the mitzvot and whatnot. So in a way, you are you're losing something because you're close to Hashem before you're born. However, when you come into this world, we can go and do the mitzvot and whatnot as we grow to find those sparks that we have lost as we're coming into this world, so that we can actually bring Hashem into the world.
So saying you lose the Torah knowledge, but you gain the ability to do mitzvahs.
Yes, and then to study Torah as well, so that you can bring Hashem into this world.
Got it. Okay, good. Don?
Well, I wanted to go back for a moment about Moshe and his greatness. I mean, he was born to Hebrew workers, slaves, but he was raised in the Pharaoh. He was raised as a prince of Egypt. He was taught leadership. He was taught military. He was taught engineering. What what princes did, because they were builders and they were warriors. So he was an excellent candidate from his childhood and his raising to his future role. And as far as recognize him, what I read, and it's still current in the Middle East, the robes that a man wears are very identifying as to what tribe, what stature, what rank he has. And so he wouldn't necessarily have discarded those on his exit from Egypt. And when the daughters saw him, they saw not only was he Egyptian, but he was an Egyptian of some stature. And he proved it by his courage, bravery, stepping in, chasing away several people, being outnumbered. So he showed his greatness. It makes a lot of sense when you think of how he was raised as to what his future role would be, even though his speech problems and his modesty, which you don't usually see in generals, but it could be.
Right. It's definitely very clear that the girls did recognize that he was Egyptian, like you said, probably from his clothing. Like I said, the fact that the daughter said it, obviously they did say it and they did recognize it. The focus today was on why is it important for the Torah to mention it, and then yes, I know that opinion. It's definitely, there is an element to that too. Definitely, just from a physical point of view, the knowledge of the inner workings of a leader, obviously it helps to grow up in the Pharaoh's house. It's actually interesting, by the way. We're also told he also grew up in his parents' house for a point in time, because it says that he didn't want a nurse from the non-Jewish nurses, and it says he was sent back to his mother to be nursed. And there's actually debate amongst the commentaries how long that was. Some say it was up to 6 years old. Some say they pushed it up to 12 years old that he was living there. So it's an interesting thing, just that he managed to actually be raised in two places, both in his real parents' home for definitely a period of time, and then later on in the Pharaoh's house. But
one other comment, if I may.
Yeah.
Being born, it's like Lady said, it is now his first opportunity to give back. Before he was taking, and now he is born and he has the opportunity to become a mensch, to become a b'nai mitzvah, to do all of the good things that would be expected of someone with the gift of birth.
Good. So I'm happy we have such a smart crowd. So now we'll actually read that. Everybody got it. We all aced it. Okay. So let's take a look over here. So here's the Rebbe. Okay, so the Rebbe asked the question that I asked, and he answers like this. The answer: despite having everything in the womb, being fed and taught everything provided for, the fetus is not an independent being. Everything has been provided ready-made. It has accomplished nothing on its own, and definitely hasn't had the opportunity to work hard and invest effort in its own work and achievements. Clearly, being in that state is not the purpose of its creation. A Jew is created to be active and to fulfill a role and mission in the world. We thereby become a partner with God in creation. In other words, when we look at creation is something God gave us. God created the world. We didn't do anything with it. But when we take an active role in the world, we actually become partners in the creation, which is something that was given to us. Our sages explain that God told the children of Jacob, just as I create worlds, so too your father creates worlds. In other words, Jacob took an active part in constant recreation of the world according to God's will, i.e. illuminating with the light of the Torah and the mitzvot. We're not going to focus too much on Jacob part. The main point you get. For the newborn baby, this only becomes possible upon being born there in the physical world. That is when he gains the ability to function and conduct himself as an intellectual being and to fulfill his role and mission to influence and not be influenced by the world. So that's an important point, which we're going to focus on, is that being a fetus is all about being influenced, and being born is all about gaining the ability to influence others. The period of gestation in the womb is merely a temporary situation which needs to be undergone to be able to fulfill one's true purpose, to fulfill God's mission in the world, and true joy and fulfillment can only be experienced when a person is able to fulfill that mission. Very interesting. I want to focus on those words again. True joy and fulfillment can only be experienced when a person is able to fulfill that mission. So we have all these things in life which bring us pleasure, but pleasure is not the same as joy. We can gain pleasure from a lot of things, but fulfilling our mission is what gives us real joy and fulfillment. Now let's return to those. All right, so I'm going to stop here before I get to that part. So what do I want to say from here? What I want to say is like this. There, Facebook. Is that, as many said, is that despite birth being a bad moment for the loss of all the spiritual powers that we may have, it's an important and defining moment in your life. It's the moment that your life actually means something. It's the moment when you can start giving back and accomplish something. Obviously, in the beginning, the mission, obviously, it's a mission that develops over time. When you're first born, there's not much you give to the world, although, you know, when you're a first child, you make your parents into parents, right? And really every smile, you're already giving back to the world, and definitely you give back a lot of diapers that your parents have to take care of. But it's a defining moment in a person's life, is the moment that they're born. And so we have an understanding that although birth is not a glamorous moment spiritually, it's not a glamorous moment, it is celebrated because it enables us to do something that's more meaningful, i.e., and that is our mission on this earth. And so we will apply the same principle that I'm saying over here to Moses, that although being born in Egypt is definitely not spiritually glamorous, it's not a spiritually glamorous thing. Now, to Don's explanation was a very good explanation from the physical perspective of redemption, but we also have to remember there's a spiritual element of redemption, right? So that was a very, very good explanation to this physical element of redemption, how, you know, he was a great leader and he may have learned it from the pharaohs, but from a spiritual perspective, being born in Egypt is not as glamorous as, say, being born in Jerusalem, right? Being raised in the pharaoh's house is definitely not as glamorous as being raised in his parents' house, but nevertheless, glamorous means an obvious. Glamorous means an obvious beauty. That's what I'm using over here as glamorous.
Poverty versus royalty.
Yeah. So
the
Pharaoh's
poverty of
house,
the family, the riches and the royalty. I don't know if there's a better word than that.
Right. The Pharaoh's house is a spiritually impoverished place. It's a spiritually poverty, right? Has a spiritual poverty. In fact, even when he's born, 3 months after he's born, as a little baby, he's thrown into the Nile River to escape death and destruction. Egypt was against his birth, really, in essence. Nobody wanted him to be born. The Pharaoh did not want him to be born. The Pharaoh wanted him dead. And really, I guess what I'm getting to is birth. It's also an interesting thing, is birth is, I always like to, you know, there was a rabbi who once pointed out, you know, most of your major life decisions you don't make. You know, what family you're born to and what era you're born to, what gender, we still say that, you know, the health, a lot of things, you know, genetic things, who you marry. Obviously, as a believing Jew, you know, we believe it's predestined who you marry. A lot of the blessings in your life, or a lot of the details of your life, are already predetermined for you. And that's really how we look at birth. Birth really is the essence of, you don't have a choice. You're thrown into it. You didn't have a choice to be born. You were born into that moment, into that family, into that point in time. And so Moses was born into a country which didn't want him to be born. He was raised in a home which did not want his spiritual lineage to continue. He was a Levite, of course, which were the ones who studied. But he didn't get stuck in that situation. He understood that that situation is something to be overcome. That situation is an obstacle that one can override and actually turn it around and make it into something better. We're going to give an example. We're going to pause the story with Moses for a moment and give a different example. The Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, wrote a book called the Tanya, and he has a discussion in there. He has a chapter over there about depression. And in one of the chapters of depression, he discusses that there are some people who get depressed when they're praying and they get foreign thoughts coming into their mind. This is theoretical because nobody here in this class ever has this. You know, when you're trying to pray and suddenly business comes into your mind, very theoretical. But some people, when they pray, they get foreign thoughts in their mind. They suddenly get, you know, business coming into their mind. Some people may even get sinful thoughts in their mind as they're praying. And the Alter Rebbe was saying a person might be disheartened by this. They might get depressed and say, look, I'm trying to pray and look what's coming at me. You know, it must mean that deep down I'm a bad person. And again, it's a chapter that Alter Rebbe was talking about, you know, how to get rid of depression. This is very often a thing, you know, people think about very often about, you know, the thoughts that come to their mind, especially people can get very down about thoughts that come to them. And the Alter Rebbe said that, on the contrary, having thoughts come to you when you're trying to do something good should not only not make you depressed, but you should focus on the matter at hand. It actually gives you an opportunity to overcome the thoughts that are coming to you in your mind. And he gives an example. He says, for example, imagine if you're trying to pray and there's somebody in synagogue, which never happens, but there's somebody in synagogue yapping in your ear, okay? Somebody yapping, yap, right? And all you're doing is you're trying to pray. So what would be the best advice? Would the advice be to talk to them or tell them to shut up? And probably not a good idea either, right? I mean, you can ask them probably nicely to be quiet. But the best thing would be is you focus on your prayer and use it as an opportunity to concentrate more. And the Rebbe points out that actually, when you have the challenge, you actually end up concentrating more. In other words, when you pray, when there is no distraction at all, it may be an ordinary prayer, but when you have to really concentrate to block out the noise, then suddenly your prayer is a more concentrated prayer, is a more powerful prayer, is you're a lot more involved into the words that you're saying, right? Because the only way to not get distracted is to really think about what you're saying. Let's say, for example, you need to go, you're flying out in the morning, you need to pray in the airport. This may have happened to you. When you pray in the airport, it's a very distracting place. Now, there's obviously two ways you can go about it. You can pray very distractedly, happens many times. Not to me, of course, but theoretically. But sometimes you say, well, it's an airport and I'm going to take the opportunity to really focus on what I'm saying to block out all the busy noise that's around. Obviously, if you have ways of getting a quiet part of the airport, you should. But I'm going to pray really, really with intense devotion to block out the noise. And that's really the way that you should do it. And that was what the Alter was saying. If you're praying, getting business thoughts in your mind, don't be depressed. Oh no, look here, I'm trying to pray and these thoughts are coming to my mind. Thoughts come to your mind. You don't have a choice. What you do have a choice is how you deal with them. And so not only you shouldn't become depressed about them, but you should use that challenge as an opportunity to make your prayer even greater. Take the challenge and use it as an opportunity to go further. I think in the sports, they talk about this all the time, right? They're always looking for motivation, right? So if somebody on the sports talk is yapping about, I don't know, they're slow, they're fast, they're not a good team, they're this, they're that. They all use it, you know, they put on the board. I've never been in a locker room, so I don't know, but this is what I hear. They use it as motivation, you know, it's a motivation for them when they hear the yapping, you know, the talk all about them. That's what Alter was saying. In your prayer, use the challenge as a motivation to take your prayer from an ordinary prayer and to make your prayer into a more powerful prayer. This is kind of like what they say in English, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? Now it's cliche, and like any cliche line, if we don't think about it, it doesn't actually do much in our life. But we need to take that line and use it in our life. So for example, obviously in a spiritual sense, if there's a mitzvah that's really hard for you, if there's a mitzvah that's difficult for you, you can get depressed about it and say, oh my gosh, why is it so difficult for me to do this? Or you can say, wow, this is an opportunity for me to really do this mitzvah with real intention, with real kavanah, with real hard work. It's an opportunity. It's a way of looking at it. And the Rebbe actually brings our Rabbi brings a very interesting example of where hard work really pays off. And he brings an example from exercise, the concept of exercise. So let's read what he says. Very interesting. He brings an example from exercise. Why is that the case? It is comparable to the idea of exercise. The body's muscles are not strengthened by giving constant rest. To the contrary, an arm or leg that does not move regularly will lose its function. The muscles in our arms and the legs are strengthened when they are put to use. And the same is true of the rest of the body. Although the limb seems to tire from exertion, it is clearly the only way for it to gain strength. In recent generations, the medical field has finally recognized the truth that was stated in the Talmud many hundreds of years ago, that constant function and movement and constant training in any given matter will make the body healthier and stronger. Now, the Rebbe is referring to, actually, where the Talmud says that there were people who lived in the city of Mechuzah, and these were people who were used to carrying heavy packages. And it says that for them, sitting and doing nothing was harder. This is an interesting Talmud. It said when they would do nothing was harder for them than to be working. Why? Again, because as we're saying here, exercise makes you stronger. And we have to take that lesson of exercise and apply it to our spiritual life. We have to say the challenges that are there, and again, it can apply in other areas of your life too, by the way, but understand that the challenges are there to make you work harder. If you want to exercise, you have to create tension. You have to find things that make it harder to do. When we go with the easy, when we go with what's easy for us, and we're not challenging ourselves, it becomes problematic. Everybody knows as we get older, right? Everybody, we have two choices. We can either study more and work our brains and keep our brains fresh. Those who don't, it's not very good for them mentally, right? You got to exercise the brain. You got to exercise the muscles. You got to exercise everything. And the challenge, just as physically, the challenge is what makes you stronger. Spiritually, it's the same thing too. And that was, the title of my class. Are obstacles just something we need to pass, or are they part of who we are? And what we're presenting today is, truthfully, challenges are a part of who you are. They're not just something that are blockades that we need to overcome. Or you may even look at them like, they're not even like, you can look at it also in a more theoretical way, say, well, challenges are ways of God testing us. And if we pass the test, then, God will reward us. No, it's much more than that. The challenge is not just to test you so God can reward you. It actually makes you who you are. It's a part of who you are. Just as exercise makes your strong muscles, those challenges in your life make you who you are and who you can become. And the same thing is about Moses, which is why the Zohar states that Moses was born in Egypt, raised in Egypt, and became great in Egypt. So let's see over here. The birth of Moses, i.e. the birth of the salvation of the Jewish people, we're connecting those two because he was the leader, the redeemer, occurred specifically there in Egypt, a place that didn't reflect the Jewish people's character nor their mission in the world. Egypt was a very morally abhorrent place. When they nonetheless embraced the situation and fearlessly worked to transforming that location into a dwelling place for godliness, they were born. They became an independent entity, no longer reliant on outside support. This was followed by their upbringing, their growth and progression to achieve their true spiritual potential. Now, these lines here may be confusing. Let me explain you a little bit more. Didn't explain it. I spoke mostly about Moses. Let me tell you an interesting, fascinating fact about the Jewish people. It's very odd that the Jewish people became a nation in Egypt. I don't know that you can find that in any other history of any other nation, that they became a nation in a foreign country. Yes, granted, there were Jews in the land of Israel. That was more of a family. Jacob wasn't a nation yet, right? He wasn't considered a nation. God told him, you go down there, you'll become a nation. But in Israel, they were not a nation. They were a family. When they came down to Egypt, there were 66 of them, right? Four of them in Egypt, and 66 of them came, well, 67th was born in the walls, but 67 people came down to Egypt. That's a family. It's not a nation. It's a very interesting thing when you think about it, that we became a nation in Egypt. In fact, God himself says it. Have you seen such a thing where God takes one nation from within another nation? We became a nation while we were mixed within another nation, outside of a land. And it's not just by happenstance. It happened to be Joseph came down. It happened to be the Jews came down. And so the only way to make them a nation was by having them in Egypt. No, it was by divine design. God told Abraham already, your children are going to go down to Egypt. Well, he said a foreign land. He didn't say Egypt. God told Jacob, go down there. Don't worry, I'll make you into a nation. And so it was very much planned by God that we would become a nation outside of a land. In fact, we didn't get to land for 40 years. It's a very interesting thing. We became a nation first in Egypt and then in a desert. It's like you don't find anything like that in any other nation like that, but it was by divine design, because God knew that he is creating the most indomitable nation, a nation that can survive anything. And the only nation that can survive anything is the nation that's created within the greatest challenges. A nation that's created in its own country, well, when that country falls apart, the nation falls apart. But we as the Jewish people who were created within challenge, who were created within Egypt, who were created within that challenge of Egypt, that formed who we are till today. That formed the nation that we have till today, that has an indomitable spirit that can survive anything that is thrown at us, and we can be a nation whether inside our land or outside of our land. And so challenges, as we see clearly from Moses and from the Jewish people themselves, one and the same, is it's an integral part to us that we were created through challenge. And that's what created us who we are and what we are, and the fact that till today we have been able to survive. And so we have to take that lesson in our lives. Just as the Jewish people were created as a nation in Egypt, and they had to learn not to be affected by Egypt, but to affect it, which is what Moses first embodied. That was first Moses, right? Moses was the first one to do it. He grew up in the Pharaoh's house, but he was not influenced by the Pharaoh, maybe in leadership, but he was not influenced to be the Egyptian. If anything, he went out to murder an Egyptian who was fighting his fellow Jews. Can you imagine? He's growing up in the Pharaoh's house. People are the taskmasters, and he goes out and he murders an Egyptian taskmaster. But that's because he was not influenced. He was ready to influence others. He took the challenge and said, just because it's difficult doesn't mean we can't break out. He said, we may be born here in Egypt. We may have been a nation here in Egypt for 210 years. But that's a challenge that we have to overcome and learn how to influence them. And that's what the Jewish people were trying to do in their last days in Egypt, trying to influence the Egyptians. Of course, didn't really work. You have the 10 plagues too. It says the first 5 plagues, if Pharaoh wanted to back off, he could have. The Pharaoh didn't. And so this is our lesson in our life, is that we're also born into situations. Again, that's what I was saying earlier, is that there's this idea of being born. Born means you're born into situations. You didn't have a choice. A lot of the situations that we're in are not by our choice. Sometimes we like to say it's our choice, or maybe it was partially our choice. We always have to understand that God places us into situations that we're in because nothing is out of the power of God. And we have to take those challenges and realize that is it's not just an obstacle to overcome, but that is what's going to create who we are and the message that we can share with others and the message that we can share with the world. It's that challenge that creates us. So let's read here. The Rabbi has a couple examples, and we'll share a few. This is a response to those who ask, if God wants us to study Torah and fulfill his commandments, why does he send us to Egypt? All exiles are called Egypt according to the Talmud. Why does he place us in a situation in which we experience obstacles in our observance of Judaism? Obstacles which sometimes come from non-Jews and sometimes even from Jews. He should have placed us in a paradise amongst angels, fed us manna from heaven, and water from the well of Miriam, surrounded us by the clouds of glory that launder our clothing, allowing us to study Torah and observe the commandments with peace of mind, right? So you might say, I'm in Palm Harbor, Florida. If God wanted me to be religious, I should be in Jerusalem. I don't know, wherever, A separate argument is voiced by those who live in free countries. If God placed us in the place with abundance of material pleasures, we are obligated to embrace it all and indulge in everything that comes our way. The Zohar therefore teaches us that a Jew finds himself in Egypt for a very specific reason. There he is born, there he is raised, and there he achieves his true greatness. He is there to be born into his Jewish identity, to raise his Jewish identity, and to reach the full spiritual potential inherent in his Jewish identity. For this, he needs to be in Egypt and own his Egyptian surroundings. He's not there to acclimate himself to his environment. He's there to transform the environment to the place fit for a Jew. In other words, one may have said oh, where did Moses become the spiritual guy that he was in Midian. When he was learning by his father-in-law, who was a believer in God. No, his real growth came when he was challenged. His true growth came when he was challenged in the land of Egypt. And that's what the Zohar stresses. No, don't think he got it from Midian from his father-in-law, which his father-in-law was a great guy. He got it in the land of Egypt. That's where all of his greatness came from. And so we should never think, well, when my situation changes, then I can change my life. When life becomes easier, then I'll do the things that are necessary, you know, or as the Talmud says, right? The Talmud says, the Pirkei Avos, Ethics of Our Fathers, has this great line. It says a person shouldn't say when I have time, Eshna, I'll study. Shema lo tipana, it says. Maybe you'll never find the time. Don't wait to find the time. Maybe you'll never find the time. And so similarly, we shouldn't wait till we leave Egypt for the greatness. You have to become great within Egypt, and that's how you overcome it. And so that's what we were saying today earlier. We have all these obstacles, and we really wish them to be gone. And I'm sure, truthfully, I can tell you, I wish for them to be gone. It'd be a lot easier. But sometimes they will go by themselves. We pray to God they will. But many times they're there because we have to work through them. And so fascinating enough, the way to break our boundaries is by working through them. And when we work through them, we break them in a way that changes us forevermore and changes us in a way that we become totally different people. And so let me show the final words of the Rabbi here on this topic. Moses channels this power to every single Jew. He's one of the 7 shepherds of Israel who brings life and godliness to the entirety of the Jewish people, empowering us to transform our individual Egypt. When you look around and notice something that isn't as it should be, something that is unjust or unrighteous, or something that contradicts Torah mitzvot, fleeing to a different place is not the answer. Your job is, there he was born, take on the challenge and engage with the elements which you encounter and transform them to reflect the will of the Torah and the true Torah, the Torah of life. That is why very interesting, when people would come to the Rebbe very often and ask the Rebbe if they could move, usually people were asking to move to Israel. They were in different countries. Usually the Rebbe would say no. There, although your life in Israel will be so much easier spiritually, there's so much more that you can give back to your community while you are where you are. And so on rare occasion did he write off and allow people to go to Israel. I want to show a 5-minute video, and I want to give you background of it. And the background of it is that in 1985, just how the Rebbe lived this lesson in his life, and maybe we can take it. In 1985, somebody started taking books from the Chabad library, a grandson of the previous Rebbe, claiming that Chabad doesn't do anything anymore. The organization is, so to speak, dead, and he was allowed to take the books as part of his inheritance. Ultimately, Chabad and the Rebbe won in court, but it was very difficult 2 years for the Rebbe. Hearing somebody say this, the organization is dead, and you can just take any books you want. And the Rebbe in this talk, given shortly after the victory, this 5-minute talk took this exact lesson that we're talking about today, taking challenges and saying it's not just something unfortunate and thank God we're past it, but it's actually meant to be a moment of growth. And the Rebbe also brought an example from Joseph. When Joseph was brought to Egypt in slavery, he told his brothers, I know that you didn't send me here. In other words, it's not a challenge that brought me here, it's God that sent me here. So let's watch this 5-minute clip. So let me just do this. Just going to mute all. That's on double speed.
Viele, wenn stehen der noch ein Reis davon, darf maßbar sein, andere, Allahs kann sich allein, aber das ist nicht eine Sache, was Chas v'Sholem Mikrehu, oder das ist nicht eine Sache, was Chas v'Sholem Kedei man soll bleiben bei dem Zahl mit dem Magmas Nefesh. Und dass ich Bechlau nicht als Sache verbunden mit Bnei Odom, auf Afol Pivo dämmte das Gewehr nach Farmatentäler. Allahas kamen bis Manenu Lachrimatentäler. Ist auch noch mehr Begolui, was ja Jid und Tere, ist das 91 Sach bis Israel Reise, Bekutschibrichu Kuluchad, Abishas Shlochani, am gefindt sich in Amai mit der Matze, was für Amai mit der Matze soll nicht sein, darf man betrachten, dass das Aini von Aschlichus, und das ist Aschlichus, was lei Atemschlochani. Nur wo denn das Likim ho Likim, und in der Ruf Gufe hat man nechet, die Minje, was man darf davon herabnehmen, bis in a meise hua iker, meise bepeil, a jeder Ried darf mäßig sein, in sein Piulis Beelom, und mäßig sein mit der Hakore Brura und a Idee Brura, als ist a Schliach von der Lekim. Was Lechier hat sich der Rebischter das gekonnt befen Golui, und in der Nähe von Hawaii, von Midas Arachmim, hat der Rebischter gewollt, dass das soll gehen durch den Lewusch von Elikim, aber die Kavoni dasselbe, wie Adler, wie bald das nimmt sich, von der Indien, die Besesser und Behellen, ist das ein Jerida Nesefes, dass soll zukommen, in der Aliyah, bis in Aliyah, Shalei Be'erach, und in was besteht der Aliyah, a jeder Ried darf sich betrachten, als ist ein Schliach und ein Schliach von dem Ebersten allein. Und noch höher, wie der Eberste steht in der Kus Begoloi, nur wie steht in der Nord und in Unionen, wo das sogar Lechere Lekim wie Zimtzum, Adavki dorten soll Megale sein, und Schluche Shalodem Kemeise, mit den ganzen Stühlen von Göttlichkeit, dass da viel dorten durch die Schlichus Leschaken, Schmei Schom, Geteres Abal Schemte, was Nesiderein hat übergegeben. Das immer die Schem mit Zade Geber Kinonu, als wo kommt und was für einmal mit dem Masse kommt, soll dorten Schmei von dem Mebischten, soll dort machen, dass in der Leben also sein Lischaken, und das auch vom Loschen Mischkon, und Mikdosh Ikre Mischkon, bis wir Schachanti Besecham, ohne Medik, in seine eigene Dalle Dames, und das gibt sich echt ein Hesber, Lechiera, am Hot Teinis in Ayini, was man in den Ruf aufgetan, Deles wie nicht Flois. Und beim Juchot sind nicht Sidereine gekommen bei Medina so. In den Minen beim Juchot von Afotzes Amayones-Schutzer, bis Eifen, bis Echet und in Anefen, da soll durchnehmen der Afotzes Ayadus-Schutzer, also viele in alle bis von Yadus, es Echet Nikel, das ist durchgenommen und das wird vereinzigt mit Nimis Mide Mayim, bis dem Bekehr Mayim Chaim, mit Göttlichkeit allein, fragt man sich die Scheile, was hat man gedacht, haben dem Schlachani in dem Mayim du Masse, was sich noch vor dem getan in der Ruf, gedeles wie nicht Flois, wenn die Sidereine allein hat auf der Ruf Meid gewähnt, von ihm du hoch in Kulchen, da fahres mir darf mehr nicht wie zuputzen die Knäpplach, ich beschaß mir will bringen, zu noch a größere Aliyah, wo das der einzige Sieber, und was mir, der einzige Biur, was mir kann gefunden als a Sieber, zu dem Dover Hamavho, in welchem Matzav Hamavho, und des Feikes, in welchem hat so gefunden, Gedea Duro Druf soll zukommen, kam Pom im Kocher, und noch mehr Schlei Berach in Afotzes Amayonis Chutzo, Für mich hatten das Song getan in der Teine, aber ist nicht Poil, nicht aktiv, und in der Teine, aber wir nutzen nicht die Ksovim, mit den Sforim, mit Divra de Kim Chaye, mit den Piulis von Apostel Ayades Chutzo, bemeile das Scheile, zieht das Gehör zu dem Wort, v'chulu, v'chulu.
So it's a very powerful statement. I'll end with that is obviously Chabad was very active then compared to when Chabad started in 1940, that was 1987. How much Chabad had done at that point in time. But the Rebbe was saying, despite how much we've done, if there was a challenge, it's not just we should say, oh, there was a challenge, thank God we passed it. No, we have to grow from that challenge. Don't just bypass it. There's obviously something that has to be done. Otherwise, why did God create this whole situation to begin with? And so the Rebbe said we have to do a lot more. And if you were there back in 1987, you say, what more can Chabad do? Chabad is already everywhere. But since then, Chabad has tripled in areas serviced and in many, many other areas. And that's really the lesson in our life, is that the challenges in our life are they're not just obstacles to be passed over and to walk past or over or under, whatever, but they're really meant as items that we have to grow through and items that propel us in our growth. And whenever we experience a challenge and we pass it, always try and find the lesson in it and how it can change you and make you a better person, not just to go, phew, oh my gosh, I'm lucky I dodged that one, but look for the ways in which it has made you a better person and utilize that to the point where, just as Moses was called an Egyptian, because that was a description of who he was and how he became who he was, we have to take the Egypt in our lives, the challenges and difficult situations in our life, whether it's from performing Torah mitzvos or in other areas of our life. And not to say the fact that there's a challenge either means that I shouldn't do anything or just hope that it goes away, but to grow through those moments and become better people, and more importantly, to better our mission in this life and the mission for which we were born. And with that, I'll end the Facebook.